This is a cautionary tale. Do not let this happen to you. Having your brain eaten is no fun. Unless it's not your brain and you're a zombie. Actually, I think since the zombies love brains, I might be safe either way. What? Moving on. What you need obviously are plants. And for that, you need pots. I use OSB for these, mainly because that is what I had on hand. For the angles of such a piece, I like to consult Matthias Wandell's splayed mitre chart on his homepage. Search for splayed mitre and you'll get there. I use my compound mitre saw to set both angles at once, but you can also achieve this by tilting the blade of your table saw and work with an angle gauge, or using a tiltable circular saw with an angled guide, or a bandsaw with the table tilted. Really, there are many ways to skin a zombie. Maybe because the skin is so loosely attached. And on the plus side, this will not have to bear much load, so small imperfections can be overlooked if there's enough glue. To glue the pots up, I use duct tape, both to hold them in place as well as to clamp them. You can go with the excuse that this shape is intentional, but to make it look more pot-like, I wanted to make it, well, rounder. To that end, I take two round pieces of roughly matching size and clamp the plank between the centers on the lathe. This is mainly meant for rough shaping, and while I try to get them as centered as possible, I keep the lathe speed low just in case. A face shield, as always, is a good idea. This works rather well, and there's little sanding left to be done afterwards. Well, there could have been even less if I had put a little more lathe skills to good use, but OSB is not my favorite wood to turn. Anyway, I use my belt sander in a vise to get this completely smooth. Now I could claim that for science sake I tried shaping a pot purely on the belt sander, as you can see here, but that would be misleading in the sense that it's not true. I did the first 3 pots on the belt sander before I had the idea of the lathe to begin with. Learn from my mistakes, so at least someone does. To blend in, I cut some pieces to fit into the top by forcing my hand inside and tracing the inner shape with a pencil held close to the wall, meaning that I get an offset all the way around. Since the whole thing is going for a comic or cartoon look, I will resist mixing paint for as long as I can. Thus, orange is the closest to proper terracotta, and that is what the pots will be. This piece will of course get a rich and diverse color palette of earthen brown tones. That is to say, the only brown I have. Now, we need to put some thought into our defense. Tactic is everything. Well, no. Actually, total overkill is everything. But since we only have 5 slots to blend in, we need to be economical. So the basis for all plant life is sunlight, and while the similarities to reality get a tad thin after that, we should start there. For the sunflower, we need a centerpiece that I turn here. Yes, using the Easy Wood tool Easy Hollower number 3, despite it not being a hollow form. Still, this carbide tool does the job at least as good, if not better, than my traditional tools, and on top of that I feel safe using it that way. What it cannot do is a crisp corner, which I need to attach the petals, so my parting tool gets a chance, if not to shine, then at least to cut. Then I make the petals from thin plywood leftovers on the bandsaw. The first one gets sketched out. Then this one serves as a master for all the others. Again, I feel safe holding this stack while cutting the petals without any aid. But I'm aware of the risks, and I know that I would rather let go and, as an optional step, dive for cover rather than risking my skin. Also, go slow, be prepared, and make sure that there's as little pressure as possible building up that might unload in an unexpected way. Of course, this way the petals will all be slightly different. Organic, I would argue. The problem with that becomes apparent in a moment. After I made enough, checking them against the centerpiece, I use a sanding drum in my drill press to give them a cove so they fit better. I also chamfer them for a more natural look, if that is possible. They go on with standard wood glue and spring clamps, but there's a catch. Some of the petals turned out asymmetrical, i.e. tilted to one side. That means that depending on how I arrange them, they cover more or less space, and in the end I need to cut one petal a lot smaller to fit it in. Organic. The leaves for the sunflower are made from solid wood scraps, sketched out and then cut on the bandsaw. I also used the bandsaw to shape them slightly, but the small pieces do not lend themselves well to full-on Diresta carving. Since I already have the belt sander set up, I add a little more organicity to it. Is that actually a word? I guess it is now. A dowel makes for the stem, which will see itself attached to the flower via a pocket hole. Yellow for the petals, and let's face it, and a coat of acrylic lacquer seals the deal. Next, we need to be offensive. Calling zombies names works only insofar as it confuses them. They do not remember their own names after all. So the offensive I'm referring to needs to be a little less subtle and more pea in your face. No, not that pea, but pea as in pea shooter. I turn the basic shape from a piece of beam cutoff, and here I go a little awry with what will be the mouth. I should have turned it smoother than a two-stage Forstner hole. Oh, remember the leaves that, for the sunflower at least, I shaped with my bandsaw? Well, again, I wanted to try the more complex approach of using sanders only. And yes, again, I actually did the ones on the belt sander first before giving the bandsaw a try. My mistake, get your own. This plant's stem gets attached using angled holes to make sure that the pea is as leaned back as makes sense, and after making the connecting holes with a spade bit, I take a piece of dowel and sand it to fit on the belt sander. Anyway, the pea gets a green coat and I try to cover up the suboptimal mouth with black paint, and keep an eye on the lacquer too. Now we have a good offense, we need some defense, and while the best defense might be a good offense, we really want some defense here, and nothing says defense like a walnut. Or it would if it had a mouth. And the ability to speak. Which would seriously freak me out. Or make me go nuts, rather. This plant is actually rather easy to make. I take another beam cutoff and shape it on the bandsaw. First I trace out the outline onto what will be the front and cut it out. Then I tilt the table and chamfer the edges in order to sneak up to a somewhat roundish shape. And since it is already set up, I give it final shape and remove the bandsaw marks on the belt sander. What this chain is doing there rather than the trusty duct tape? It serves as a removable holder for the dust extractor hose, by taking a double length, wrapping it around and through its loop, then pinning it in place with a screw through the links. As for the nut, no, not me, the other nut, it gets a brown paint job held by a screw in the bottom. The same brown as the earth in the pots, but that cannot be helped. To bring out its signature look, I paint two huge eyes. With the appropriate pupils, the walnut gets lacquered too. Sustenance, offense, defense. What else is there? Well, for starters, a huge number of plants to choose and 2 pots that still need filling. The walnut is not forever. Zombies can gnaw through it. So let us strengthen our defense with a good defensive offense. Enter the chomper. As the name implies, this plant's purpose is to chomp down zombies, one at a time. Planted behind the walnut, it will give it some relief. To make it, we need a ball, and I turn one from a rather horrifically glued up plank made of scraps. After the general rush of adrenaline-fueled shaping is over, I turn it into a close approximation of a ball. I sand the top half before parting it off, add a slot to the bottom piece which will turn out to be completely pointless, and proceed to shape it and eventually part that off too. To make the jaws fit, they need a flat spot, and my first attempt sees me holding them with a clamp and using a bandsaw. While this is fiddly and awkward to do, it doesn't really work either. So, you guessed it, off to the belt sander. I aim to make both flats of equal size, and now they work as advertised. A pilot hole through one half, carefully aimed and sunk, allows me to clamp the halves together with a screw. For the stock, I sketch something on a piece of scrap, cut it out on the bandsaw and sand it organic, or at least smooth. I also match the angles of the top to those of the jaw, at least to a certain extent. Since I do not have a purple color available, I am forced to mix blue and red, and against my better judgment, it turns out too dark. Still, no point in wasting good paint, nobody will know the difference. After painting the main body, I take to the teeth. I take a long small slat and, on the table saw, turn it into a triangle. This triangle I then resaw into teeth on the bandsaw. Note the impromptu zero clearance insert so I do not have to dig teeth out of the dust collector's bag. Now that's a great pickup line right there. You could easily do the same with a scroll saw and cut out every teeth on its own. I proceed to shape the teeth on disc sander and with an additional table to prevent, well, this. I make sure that a couple, at least half, fit into the slot cut on the lathe. The body itself gets some green accents, and a hole for the screw to hold it against the stem. A pilot hole would have been the smart choice here, but it can be substituted by the ability to sugarcoat the crack into being a deliberate design feature. Remember to cover up the screw with some black paint too. I use a kind of CA glue to glue the teeth in place, and if you think that I should have painted them first, I'll let you in on a secret. I chose not to paint them, because I love how the grain runs and it gives them depth. Also, less work. And here is why the slot in the teeth was a bad idea. With the paint, most do not fit anymore, and worse, gluing them down works just as well on the flat jaw, if not better. To finish the chomper, I add a few spike-like decorations to it. If you were waiting for eyes, sorry, but it still gets lacquered. With that done, I have one pot left and most of our needs covered. So, how about some overkill? Enter the bamboo shoot, a plant that, nerds will tell you, stems from the Garden Warfare games rather than the original ones. But while I turn the basic shape, I will let you know that this is the funniest ego shooter that I've ever played, so reason I added it here is, well, just because I can. Also, it'll give us some much needed firepower by pelting the zombies with whatever it is that bamboo actually shoots. And like the pea-shot, the bamboo needs a hole to shoot from. I will paint it black anyway, so it doesn't need to be that deep. Since this is the last plant I show you, let's just ignore the fact that it's not the last plant that I made. I feel confident in getting a little artistic. Using watered down yellow, I add some accents to the top half. The 2 twigs I cut from plywood, sand them smooth and, yes, slightly organic, and attach them with 2 holes drilled at an angle. This bamboo is a mean choice, because, let's face it. I mean, yes, I'm making this pun for the last time. Let's face it. And there we go. A solid, sustainable defensive offense paired with an offensive defense, defending your brain no matter how offensive. Or something. Let us put it to the test. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram at Dominic's Woodworks for teasers and stuff that does not make it into videos. And until next time, keep your brain safe, after all, it's the best one you have, and remember to be inspired.